Hi, Helen.
Hello. Thank you for joining.
Yeah, this will be an interesting conversation given
Mhm.
the kerfuffle.
We are currently recording as per Hyperledger community guidelines. just,
Perfect.
just throwing that out there.
No, absolutely. Well, no, this is an open conversation. Part of me wonders. I mean, the short-term stuff we need to execute, but there's some conversations going on even later today about the AFJ announcing their
Mm.
intention to gather community feedback and then move to the OWF.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. AFJ. AFJ. What is framework
Aries.
JavaScript, right?
Yep. Uh-huh.
So this guy potentially, which one also left? The
There's a .NET framework that hadn't been maintained in a while.
oh, they hadn't been like meeting or user groups or anything. Okay.
No, there was never a meeting, and the repo itself was relatively stale.
Hmm.
Um,
Are
and
these all
so
the current ones? Aries main RFCs.
we don't have we do have bifold on there. So the most active ones are Akapai, the Go. There are peripheral meetings that are a little bit less visible. Go and VCX are moving. They're like things are happening, but they're not stuff's happening there. The mobile agent Xamarin towards the bottom has
Mhm.
been archived.
Oh,
That
okay.
kind of never grew into an active user community.
Xamarin is archived.
Yeah.
Okay. Um,
And the agent test harness, the mobile test harness are used. There hasn't been as much super recent development on them, but there's about to be some more just because of the other the interop targets and stuff that we're working on.
mhm.
But AFJ and Akapai are decidedly the two largest in that thing, largest projects.
AFJ is Aries framework JavaScript, right? Whoops. AFJ. Okay. Hey Tim, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you guys doing?
Okay. Um, oops. Oh, well, I'll fix that later. Um, cool. So well, as Alex is coming, I assume he's coming. So this is all updated. The front page of the Hyperledger Aries project. So we have a new description, and that's also on hyperledger.org. And then we have kind of an overview, kind of next overview section, key characteristics, and then we have some learning resources that again the community can add to as there's like more recordings and content and stuff like that. um, how people can ask questions, how people can join the community. Kind of the main community meetings are the Aries working group meetings, and then all the repos um, and the user group meetings that support them. So if there's not something on here, something obviously, people can update this as the community evolves. Um,
This looks awesome, by the way.
okay, yeah. And so um this and then like there's just some weird stuff happening in this page tree over here. Like under meetings there's the Aries DidCom V2 working group, Aries Mobile Summit, Aries working group, and then this group because I didn't know where else to put it. um
So
so
the V2 working group hasn't met for a while.
mhm.
Um, they did a whole bunch of work, but then as we were targeting DidCon V2 in the main group, and that kind of tapered off a little bit. So if you scroll down, it's about May last year was the last one,
Yeah,
and then
is it
the mobile summit was kind of similar in the sense that like it didn't it happened. There was stuff that happened, but it's not an ongoing thing.
mhm.
So there are working groups of the individual code bases, users groups, etc. for that. And then there's the work. There's the main Aries call, and that's about it.
Okay. I heard a beep, like someone's trying to message me and I can't find it.
What beeped?
Running a few minutes late. Okay, I got like a notification. Okay, from Discord. I was like, that is a unique
Is that
boop,
Alex?
boop, boop. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so in terms of marketing, here is this page if you want to add yourself to it. I will put it in the chat. And because this is a Hyperledger community meeting, here's the antitrust policy and then all the other code of conduct stuff, etc. Yeah, so the draft wiki page is updated and then content has been shared on hyperledger.org. We are still pursuing an animated video. We need to chat with Ben a bit more about that to see if there's resources and see how we could support in terms of wireframing that out and storyboarding that out. The other idea that I had, or that we were talking about, was putting together a white paper and kind of the bigger picture Aries overview white paper, and maybe have like each project, deliver a section to or something like that. But really focusing on use cases and what people are doing with it, et cetera. I think, part of the conversation early on, a few months ago about whether or not Aries or OWF was the right home for places for some of the kind of repos or parts of the community had to do with the fact that that Aries had evolved, and this is just my interpretation, so Sam, totally correct me if I'm wrong, but that Aries had evolved past its initial kind of toolbox of otherness that it initially had come out with, and more people are focused on wallets, especially with the EU specifications and other things that are going on. And so folks thought that that OWF might be a more logical place for some of these repos to live. I don't know if that is still the case, if that makes sense, if that doesn't make sense, but I think getting us all on the same page with what Aries is and what the repos are doing, I think would be helpful. I don't know if you have any further thoughts on kind of the where to go next with Aries and the OWF kind of conversation.
I think that's good. It's one of these cases of, and this happens whenever a new org shows up, right? It's a little bit of overlapping stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The most interesting bit here is that the overlap is substantial, maybe complete, with what could be an OWF, and so it's been a little bit to try and figure out organizational maturity and momentum and everything else to figure out whether that is a good fit. The important thing to emphasize is that the work will still get done, and the code is still usable because of license, and participation is still like an open, useful thing. So this is a pretty lightweight impact, even though it feels really big. Like it just isn't it isn't crazy, hard or complicated because of that. So it's not worth freaking out over. It's important to pay attention to, and we'll figure stuff out, but it's not the end of days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess I want to make sure that everyone's needs are being met, including those who maybe are dues paying members of Hyperledger because they wanted to kind of reap all those kind of public benefits of being a leader in whatever project they're in, and having attention focused on, say, their deployments, and working with others in the community who are also deploying. And that's kind of why they have that membership, relationship with Hyperledger is specifically for Aries, and then what that means for Hyperledger and what that means for Aries and what that means for those individual organizations who now feel pulled potentially in two different places, to kind of split their membership or leave one for the other or whatever, and kind of what all that means. So I don't know. I just want to make sure that their needs are being met as well in terms of their kind of business use cases, attention being paid, et cetera. And I don't know, again, what OWF is offering in terms of those organizations who do have public deployments. But I don't know. I just want to make sure that everyone's needs are being met, even, including but not limited to developers, maintainers, contributors, and also, Linux Foundation members at large, so to speak.
I have less to say about the Linux Foundation or Hyperledger members, but from the stance of like as a community leader, it's the goals and desires of the actual community members themselves that matter the most as to where code base actually lives.
Mm-hmm.
The open question that I have is not so much what to do about the code bases, but the non-code related functions of the Aries project. That and there doesn't seem to be, there could be a solution there, but there hasn't yet been a solution proposed that would promote the continued operations around interoperability and targets, et cetera, to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that changing, it means that it's a little bit harder to figure out where that goes.
Yeah, I mean, being that this is the Aries marketing call, I think the important thing here is just to identify where we want to go with Aries in, publicly. Like, is this something where, we are continuously, we will continue to drive and attract new membership, membership is in new contributors, new maintainers, new adopters of the code base? Is this, we want to bring the reputation of Aries into a broader community to do more things? Like, what is it? What is the goal here for the Aries project, publicly? And that's, I think, where we should kind of focus our energy on right now in this call.
Yeah, and I don't have anything at the moment to say about that.
Yeah. So if we were to, just drive more content, if generally the idea is to increase the diversity of a project, right? Like I think to graduate from incubator to graduated status, one of the key determinations that the TSC looks at is diversity of the community. So who is contributing, who is maintaining, are they, multiple different organizations, multiple different people, et cetera. And so I think, looking at that as being a goal is usually, one of the kind of foundational goals for any project. And if that's the case, getting more information out into the kind of general discourse of what Aries is and what we're doing. And part of where Alex and I struggled was even just getting this list of repos in user group meetings and when they meet and for someone to just jump into Aries and pick it up and start using it. I think that as I think we've talked about, there's still some improvements to be made in terms of like jump into Aries and make something in a weekend kind of a deal. Is that still accurate, that Aries isn't just a pick up and go type of project quite yet?
It depends a little bit what you mean by pick up and go.
Yeah.
You can certainly grab a code base and build on it. But it's not I'm going to just install this thing and then use a user interface and everything's fine. I don't have to, get into the details there. So, and I don't know that we haven't ever set a goal of having something that's just a ready to ship kind of a thing.
Mhm.
And so I don't know what to say about that because it depends a little bit on what perspective you're coming from. If you're an executive and you can't install it yourself and run it, then you might be really frustrated that it's not just pick up and go. If you're a developer and you're like, oh great, I can just install this and then here's an API that Occupy gives me and now I can do things with it like that, then of course feels different.
Mhm.
The other thing too is that is not a clean thing is that the community this is software that implements community standards, right? And community standards change and improve, and certain ones become more popular and less, and other ones become less popular. And so the movement of that to sort of follow the greatest amount of utility doesn't happen instantaneously. And so you could have someone that wants the newest of the best show up and be like, well, you don't support that yet? Like, no, I don't. I think this is a terrible project when it's already in the works, but it just isn't done yet, right? And so there's, calling something like done or ready or whatever else is a lot easier when things aren't moving as fast.
Mhm. So if you were to, I don't know, go to a hackathon or I don't know, be at an event with a bunch of developers and you start talking about Aries, where is the first place that you would recommend somebody to jump in at to start
Uh,
like playing with it?
It depends who they are. If they want to issue credentials, then AFJ or Occupy is the right place. If they want to develop a mobile app that does these things, then Bifold is the right place. So it kind of depends on what really they're looking to do in the ecosystem, and perhaps that's a sign that the whole project is a little bit larger overall than just a single application,
Mhm.
right? Like legitimately, Bifold by itself is a significant open source effort. So is Occupy, so is AFJ, and these other projects as well, right? And libraries and everything else. And so perhaps one of the issues is that Aries is a bundle of all these larger things that has served the community well as a coordinating point, but we might be to the point where they might exist better as independent projects. My big open question is what then we do with the coordination piece of Aries, and is it needed or is something different needed in order to serve the world where it's a little bit more diverse and the projects are a little more disparate?
So coordination as in managing all these different repositories and communities. Is that what you mean by coordination?
Managing is
I
a
mean,
really
yeah.
direct word. For example, there's a lot of interest in European Union standards across various projects. So talking about that, sharing issues, sharing things that we learn, and setting sort of target dates for when we can test not only interoperability within the Aries community, but also test projects outside of the Aries community has been something that like we've done and talked about. We've
Mhm.
also had Aries interop profiles where within the community we're looking for here's the types of functions that we actually have. What are we? What's the coordination there? I believe that work is still very important, but it's an open question as to where that work would then actually occur.
So the work being how to align Aries with other standards, global standards bodies
and
and
and,
standards,
and align Aries.
and align Aries to do it. Yeah.
Because if these become separate code bases within the overall envelope of the OWF, does the OWF already have a meeting to coordinate activities amongst code bases, or is every project left on its own and there's not a something that's attempting to coordinate efforts between them,
Mm-hmm.
or to identify a target that we all are going to voluntarily work towards for certain types of interoperability or demonstrations?
Mm-hmm.
That's my point, right? Is that like there seems to be some open questions around how that might actually occur, and it's simpler to have the code based discussion. It's a lot harder to have the coordination and sort of community discussion capabilities of that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, right now it seems like a lot of the working group calls, they end up not getting to all the things that need to be gotten to each week. There's so much to pack into that 1 hour for the general sort of working groups. I could see that, yeah, there's a lot going on in the Aries community. And so how do you like slice it and dice it? And again, from being on this call, being a marketing call, enabling the visibility of all of the projects and what they're doing, enabling like new folks coming into community and jumping in and want to be a part of it, like just usability of the project and the repos, making sure that, you know, keeping things updated on a public front, like letting people know what the cool, exciting things are doing, you know, are happening. Yeah, those are, it's really hard because there are a lot of things that are going on. So even if we were to make a white paper today, right, and in the next 48 hours, all the repos gave us a section that we could put together and, you know, describe what they're doing, it could be out of date within a month, so to speak, because everything's just moving so fast. So I don't know. I wonder if maybe breaking down the repos, or at least the primary working groups, and getting more, shining more of a spotlight kind of granularly on the different projects could be helpful. That, I don't know, that's just, I'm just thinking out loud here, to enable that, like, you know, jumping in here, like you said, depending on what people want to do, like how quickly can they pick the repos up and start working with them. But if we were to shine a light on them, that might be one idea. But
It's a little unfortunate this call was today instead of in like 3 days.
yeah,
We have this once a month, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it'll be a lot more interesting, for example, to have this call like in a week than it would be like right now, but a month may be a little bit too long. So it's possible that we schedule an out of cadence one to be able to accommodate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think initially we were saying that Aries is at a place that it's no longer what it was, right, when it launched in 2019. And then how do we best present it to the world, and saying, you know, it's a wallet functionality is not necessarily, you know, all that it is. And so the wallet functionalities are now looking at OWF and, you know, other projects as a potentially a home to go to. Oh, and I see Alex is here. Hey, Alex.
Hey, sorry, I'm late. Important meeting, can't be longer.
Yeah, no worries. I guess I'm just trying to look at kind of some of the goals for this working group with Sam, and where we want to go, what we want to try to tackle next. One of the items that we had talked about, Alex, on a previous call is a white paper, but I guess my point I was just making was that if we go through the trouble of making a white paper over the next, you know, say 6 weeks or something like that, it could potentially be out of date the second it's published, just the way that the community is operating and the way that, you know, things are kind of growing so fast. So I'm wondering, you know, really what the goals are for Aries Marketing. Like what do we want to have happen? Is it that we want to have more maintainers and contributors come? Is it that we want to have more kind of business decision makers see the project as, you know, a worthwhile endeavor for adoption? And what is it that they would be adopting by coming to Aries? Is it that we want, you know, more Aries conversations, ACOPI type conversations happening in, you know, other standards bodies globally? Like what is it that we want? And then how, you know, and then the follow-up would be like, how do we do it? But I guess I'm still just fuzzy on kind of what the goal is for at this point in time.
For my money, go ahead.
Well, I was just also observing that there's with the AFJ discussion on moving to the OWF, there's a flurry of conversations happening right now about exactly what that ought to be. And so I don't think we have an answer at the moment.
I would say that I think the second of your examples, Town, is more on the money. And I think the question is wider. I think from my outside-in perspective, the driving energy right now should be around, if we, not just this meeting, but the Aries community, truly believe that Aries is the best solution for the worldwide explorations that are happening right now across credentials and identity and everything else, then the ultimate goal is to be positioning Aries and getting it in all those conversations. So it's not just alongside as an option, but it becomes a selected way forwards for all the good reasons it provides of privacy and everything else. And so on that basis, and this is where my knowledge gap, because this is not my specialty, goes. If that's the ultimate goal and agreed, what are the steps that happen now to position Aries to support that process? For example, is it a ground up thing where you get more people adopting it and it gets momentum, in which case it ties to the second example you gave, Helen, of getting more people aware of its benefits, they start using it in their projects? Mm-hmm. Or is it that it gets referenced and used by higher level stakeholders in key meetings, in which case the effort would be to prepare materials that best support those people advocating for Aries in these situations? Or is it something else? But that for me feels like the question right now is that we're in that messy space of lots of different standards, but though because of the critical importance that identity and credentials have in our world, that we're in that really messy stage of lots of moving and shaking before, I would say, one or a very small number win out. And if that's true, then all our efforts should be on supporting Aries positioning itself to be that one. Which lends itself more to the second one. Like if we can advocate the benefits of what it is more clearly and keep doing that, I think that's really valuable. I personally think it's a white paper. I think it's about having a space where we can iterate things and improve things more quickly. So I think a web page or pages is far superior, for example. Mm-hmm. People can get the information, it's right front and center, that they have the talking points that are needed, they see the benefits so clearly. And if we want to change them and improve them and the community wants to add something, we do it in a matter of hours or a day or something, not as updating a formalized document. Mm-hmm. I think it's if my broader goal is correct, and if that is how you best get Aries in those conversations, if that's still an avenue that's open.
Yeah, so you could see, either the wiki or the hyperledger.org being a home for more relevant, updated, timely information about the newest capabilities, the newest deployments, the newest benefits, the things that the community is building, and then using that information as kind of a, I don't know, like a pinpoint or a starting place for Aries to be represented in those sort of global conversations about global standards.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we got the landing page in the Hyperledger, and I think the starting premise is we have to assume that Aries is in the conversation as a name, or gets in conversations as a name. So people therefore search for it. So we have the landing page on the Hyperledger site, and we have the wiki, which are the top two that come up when people search for that. Mm-hmm. Now, we've done a lot of work to get the landing page there you've got in front of us better. It's got our key talking points and the USPs and everything else. Now, the wiki supports that, and then we repackage the information as efficiently as possible and keep adding to it in a way that is referenceable, that people get a sense of this community is large and happening, that Aries has unique benefits in all these use cases. Mm-hmm. That if we put in and then we do really agile. I mean nimble, not agile. Nimble things to communicate out those benefits as quickly as possible, which is why I love the idea of the not contentious, but the blog post idea that Sam was suggesting before. Like, how do you get out there and say things and get these points made clearly? How do you repackage what we know to be the strongest points in the most efficient way possible across multiple channels?
And that might be as easy as doing more regular, like a more regular cadence of blog posts on the Hyperledger blog.
Yeah.
So saying, every 2 weeks we're going to put a blog out. So let's put together, a list of blog topics and authors, and even if we ghostwrite 2/3 of it and then have other folks come in and edit or whatever, but just on a regular basis come out one time a month, put all the cool latest stuff that's has been discussed or coming out of that Aries working group and what it means, and then another sort of high level kind of implementation blog or something, I don't know, like just coming out with a more regular cadence of community information. I think right now the blog is looked at as, well, when we really have to do an announcement, when it really warrants, something like Aries is graduated to a whatever status, like something like that, then we write. But I think definitely just content on a more regular basis.
I think that will help. And then the other thought that just came to mind as well is, I guess when I was talking about this adoption and this being in the conversations, is at a large scale. So it's at a federal level, international level.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there are groups and people involved in those conversations at high levels. I'm sure there are task forces and whatever else advising numerous people. First of all, where are they and what resources are they using? And second of all, if anyone has been in those conversations, even is aware of those conversations, what is the perception of Aries? What is being missed? What are they misunderstanding? Or not just from us, from a sort of like an adoption level at a local company level, but I'm talking about at a wider, in the broader picture, how is Aries being perceived? Because for me, that is perhaps the most critical thing that can be done right now, alongside, yes, the blog posts, yes, the updates to the wiki and the landing page, but how do we better make a better case for ourselves in those bigger conversations? I think that's critical.
Yeah, like who's doing the lobbying on behalf of Aries in those conversations?
Or if they're not, why are they not?
Mm-hmm.
No, there's some factors they may not be able to control. There's like a huge corporation behind it with dollars, and they'll have a view on which one they want to adopt, and we're not in that conversation. But if we are, or we're just missing a few things, wouldn't it be good to know that?
Mm-hmm.
Like someone out there could be saying, yeah, I keep pushing for this in this particular group that's advising the EU on blah, but the problem with Aries is X. Wow, thank you. Now we can do something about that.
Well, there is the argument that of blockchain in general, right? And how governments have been slow to warm to blockchain at all, like understanding the role of a ledger in the situation. And I mean, even in other Linux Foundation kind of digital trust type groups, there is a lot of folks saying, well, you shouldn't have a ledger for verifiable credentials. And why that is there's other protocols and things and ways you could do it, and ways you could architecture it. But I think that Aries is, correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, but is Aries the only ledger-based type project out there?
Aries is not ledger-based.
Okay, Aries is not ledger-based, but like the fact that it sits within the Hyperledger Foundation kind of lends itself.
It can use ledgers.
Yes.
But I don't know that it super differentiates it from other solutions or other DID methods necessarily.
Okay.
So I understood. I mean, I think these are really interesting talking points. Like, and knowing these from people in those conversations, that we say, yes, this is like a primary concern, not just that we talk about within our circle, but actually this is what's coming up. If that's the case, I understood that it doesn't need to use a ledger, but the advantages of going through DIGCOM and taking that approach are numerous, that it is worthwhile. That's one of its stronger points. Is that correct?
So DIDCOM is also orthogonal to a ledger. The one unique thing that I think you're getting at is that Aries is the largest community to have adopted DIDCOM in the entire SSI space. That's orthogonal to a ledger in all cases, but it remains that has been a core of deployment of a DIDCOM technology
Yeah.
And because of it, the approach of interaction that is not hyper focused only on credentials, but on other things as well.
So you don't need a ledger to deploy Aries or DIDCOM, but what? But like people are doing it anyways?
But in the credential space, in the energy space, if you haven't got some separate entity, such as a ledger, are you not phoning home for verification? For
Depends what
example?
you mean by it depends whether you mean cryptographic verification or like the human trust aspect of verification. It also depends on entirely how you anticipate relying on governance of some sort. There's a lot of variables in this equation. It's not quite that simple.
No,
Ledgers turn out to be really useful for a variety of things, and it's really interesting for me to watch the did web people trying, and there's a variety of folks trying to produce the next did web that is like better than did web and doesn't have some of the same issues. And the amount of work you have to do to avoid using a ledger but still get the effects that you want is kind of comical to me.
that's
Ledgers turn out
uncanny. I thought the advantage of a ledger in that, say, you can look up a public, a distributed ledger. I'm not sure it's a massive benefit, but let's call it a ledger for a second, which is separate. You don't have to go back to the original issuer to say, is this, cryptographically, not human trust, cryptographically, is this,
But
did this
there's
come
other
from?
ways besides a ledger to be able to have the public key in order to do the cryptographic verification. There's other methods that are not ledger based. They're typically, the general term for that is an oracle, is something that has the information that you need in order to make the process
Okay.
happen. There's other infrastructure that you can use to make it happen.
Yes. But there has to be some presence outside, some.
It's typically some resource that a large number of
Yes.
community members or all of them can retrieve information from.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
it turns out that for all the hate that ledgers get these days, ledgers, particularly ledgers that are designed for it, and I'm speaking of Indy here, are actually a really good match for what you would need. But there's been this huge pushback against ledgers in the sense that they've become unpopular. So despite the fact that they're a good answer, they've become less popular because of perceptions around ledgers, which is really interesting. But that's why there's been so much of a push towards like did web S or did web plus or did web whatever to try and make it better from that degree. So it's complicated though, because it in Aries itself is about software agents that facilitates wallet interactions and communication with various protocols. But it remains the largest community to believe in the ideals behind DIDCOM and the fact that we're doing more than just passing credentials around. And that we want to change away from a web-oriented or a federated identity aspect, way of doing this. And that's the interesting bit that Aries has that doesn't really exist in other places.
So I think that area, if that's, and I trust you, Sam, because you've got way more knowledge in this than I do. If that's a general concern that people are facing, or having this conversation about areas that comes up, blockchain, don't want it, then that feels like one of the angles that should become like a marketing, should be like a campaign, a mini campaign around that to dispel myths and to clarify and to say about our options. Because that feels like one of the strengths is to use, like you said, it makes sense to use a ledger with this and with this and with this because you get these benefits. You don't have to, but here's why you should. And also, by the way, it's not this, and it actually provides this. I think that stuff is very interesting. If that feels like one of the things that should be being said really clearly. Right from the basic level down of like, oh, so it uses crypto. Addressing that right the way down the chain. That's interesting.
I do appreciate this conversation also about just pulling together all the issues that people have with Aries and trying to just even put our arms around them, because that's, I think, really helpful. Sorry, go ahead, Sam.
No, I don't have anything intelligent to say.
Okay.
I think that's super cool, Sam, and you've got this knowledge, and I think that's That's something we can leverage more. I think that kind of stuff really feels like it. These should be little mini campaigns around, or many things communicated around these things to address misconceptions and to
So
advocate.
here's the other problem. If you want a decent enumeration of problems,
Mhm.
there are arguments that technical solutions, standards, and specs should be very focused and only focus on one particular thing. So you have a spec that does signatures for credentials. You have a different spec that does the data format for credentials. You have a different spec that does the protocols for credentials, and all those things, right? The
Yeah.
problem is that when you're deploying a solution, you have to have a fully vertical solution. You have to have answers for all the questions all the way down. And so Aries was a solution early on that actually provided an all the way down solution. It in fact still is kind of one of the only ones that kind of really does. As a software package, it supports credentials and protocols and wallets and other things, so you get a lot of those sort of variables in the chain, all at once because of how that works. But the main contributors of Aries have been people primarily with a handful of opinions. One of those opinions, for example, is that peer DIDs are a good idea. Another one is that we shouldn't sacrifice privacy if we have a technology that can get us that. Another one is that protocols ought to be able to do more than just exchange credentials. And the accumulation of those opinions have given the Aries project a perception that it's only about those things, because those are the things that we evangelize here and nowhere else. And so we have this weird thing where everyone is arguing for specs that do one little thing and that can be combined with other specs, but you also have this obvious need for a full stack that can actually deliver value. That's Trust over IP's entire gig is let's define the stack that actually provides the value that like everyone needs, rather than just having 60 to 70 various specs out there that you have to like grab and combine in order to like produce a thing that actually works. And so that's the complicated bit, is how do you actually handle this and produce something of a full stack nature. And that's one of the things that Aries has succeeded in, but it's also been a problem because people look at the approaches that we have and they're like, well, I have a different opinion, and I'm assuming that the community doesn't like my opinion, and so I'm going to actually do something entirely separate. That's exactly why the not Cardia, what's the there was a
I can't rescue
project that grew up in Ethereum that is basically an Aries agent, but they didn't create it inside of Aries because of those exact opinions. Is that they also wanted to support Ethereum, which no one was opposed to inside of Aries, but they basically created an Aries agent, but not inside of Aries.
Cardano?
I think I know what you're talking about. I can't remember its name.
Not Cardano. It'll take me a second to find. I don't know why I'm blanking on the name of this. I've talked about this recently, but my brain's just doing a fun thing.
No worries. So it sounds like what you're saying is there's a feeling from people who people who want to contribute, that if they're not doing something that is already exists, that they don't feel like there's a home for them at Aries, because traditionally whatever exists in a project, that's the thing that the project does. Whereas Aries, it actually does a lot of different things. So if you have a different way of doing things in another repo, another users group or whatever, that's okay. They can still, it's just another option that people can pick up. But it's a misconception about the way the Aries community functions.
It's more of a cultural perception than it is an actual like scope of defined perception.
Right.
Is that, oh, we have an opinion about doing things, and so that means it must be done this way, when it doesn't actually mean what you think it means.
So if something like, I don't know, Glyph or Carry or like, trust lists or something like that. I mean, those lots of, you know, worms to uncan there, but like there are other approaches to do things that would affect Aries, and they're not necessarily not welcome. They just don't come here because they have the, you know, there might be the perception that they're unwelcome because it just hasn't been done yet in Aries.
Well, yes, and the reason that Aries exists as a Hyperledger project in the first place is because there wasn't any place to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Like we knew we wanted to separate this thing out, and it related enough to indie, and that it made sense to actually have that happen. But yeah, like it's just it's weird because of that, right? And that's part of the interesting bits. Is that it's proceeded in such an interesting way. It's really driving me nuts.
Because if we look at another big Hyperledger project, say Fabric does, I don't know a lot about Fabric, so I don't know how Fabric does, but like these conversations aren't necessarily happening because
Veramo.
okay.
Is an Aries agent. Veramo.io. But it was created outside of Aries.
You know, it sounds like, you know, the best marketing will take a small number of very specific things and advocate them really well. Right? You do fewer things, great. And it feels like that's slightly at odds with how Aries has come to be, which is it's many things to many people, which we've seen a few times.
It is many things to many people, and perhaps so one of the things that could happen as part of the OWF conversation is that the code bases really do end up in OWF. But the question is what function is going to retain the coordinated efforts around certain things, or does every code base just go it alone and we lose the central hub? The Aries call provides a really useful function to coordinate lots of these things across. If all the code bases are going on, what happens to do decide to move, for example, what happens to the rest of them? What happens to the core Aries call that has functioned, served as a coordinating function for years in promoting common functionality and common development targets and stuff like that? All the other ones that I know of that provide this sort of a function are all external. They're done by the JFF Plugfest, or it's a DHS SVIP effort. And in the only community that I'm aware of that has regular activities that promote approaching common standards for interoperability is Aries. So does that just go away? Is it simply no longer needed and we just are at the whim of these other organizations that decide to promote certain things to solve their problems? Or as a community, do we get together in somehow, under some name, in some way, and still produce profiles for interoperability that help us to coalesce around specific goals and things as it happens? That's my big question about all of that. And because so many things are up in the air, what Aries is could change substantially. Maybe Aries persists, but is more of a series of conversations without any actual code bases. Maybe that conversation goes somewhere else, but under a different name. And I really don't know right now, which is why it's so hard to all the things you're saying are intelligent. I just have no answers.
This is really, I mean, I think that is nonsense in a way. Could you just fire something off me? Marketing is the communication and promotion of things that are known to be the things to communicate, right? What we're talking about is Aries strategy. This is a conversation to have in the main with the right people in the main group. This is about the direction of Aries we're talking about here. Marketing, we can say, if the community agrees that the things we're trying to do right now are A, B, and C, we can go off and create blog posts and web pages and whatever until the cows come home. But this feels like a conversation we're saying, what is Aries and where does it want to go? And that should be bigger than marketing. That may not be an easy conversation. There could be lots of people. You have to give to, how do you manage the community where there's lots of oars in there? I get that. Doesn't mean it's not the right conversation to have, though. This is Aries strategy.
It is.
We can't communicate something we don't agree.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's why
And
I
I
think,
think,
oh,
go
go
on.
ahead. Finish your thought.
No, I think Sam's points are bang on. I think that's really perceptive, and that's really interesting. Like, it has to be the general community, or how about this? If there's lots of people who don't really know and everyone's got an opinion, and you get, like, designed by a committee, then it has to be led by stronger people within that community, a clear vision that everyone can get on board with, and then marketing is part of executing on that.
And what I was gonna say is I don't think that these points are necessarily made on a regular basis to the dev or contributor or the individual who's participating in the Aries community. They don't really get the beauty of interop profile, or those shared common goals, and that's why they're at Aries. If they're looking at how their cog fits into the bigger wheel, and they're not seeing, they're not articulating that value, or that value is not being reinforced to them. I mean, talk about marketing. Like, that's the message that needs to come out, is saying what, the purpose of Aries is doing A, B, and C. This is the purpose of the community. The purpose of the Aries community is A, B, and C. It's not just about the code. It's not just about, the meetings. It's not just about the whatever. It's like this, what Sam said is like, this is a unique place. This does unique things. And that's why it's formulated the way it's formulated. It's not like people are, if people are upset because Aries doesn't have the word wallet in the name, I think, they're putting the wrong, emphasis on the wrong parts of the equation. It's like, if we want to do a campaign, we should do a campaign of why the Aries community is as strong as it is. And it's as strong as it is for all the things that Sam just said.
Counterpoint.
Well, that's a great one. Sorry, Jimmy, two quick things. I love that one as an angle. And I also think you could actually have a marketing angle around the fact it's multiple things that could be played as a strength. You could actually communicate the fact it can be deployed in all these amazing ways with these principles at its core. That's also an angle that can be taken.
Counterpoint.
Mm-hmm.
If the momentum around the OWF and the organization is going to have longevity, those are questions, but worth considering.
Yeah.
Then does it make sense to retain as much as possible all of the people with the sorts of ideals that Aries has espoused in the past? Or do we, by working more closely with the Open Wallet Foundation, inject some of those ideals and goals and requirements into that community for the larger gain? Are we losing by trying to promote these ideas separately, or do we promote it within some other organization that is perhaps marketed better, perhaps oriented around things, etc.? And can we make that happen?
Well, that's a great conversation that frees this from the confines of saying, is this solely about Aries, or is this about what Aries stands for and where things are going?
Yeah.
I think that's an excellent point.
I mean, if OW, or if there's any other organization, whether it's OWF or TOIP or another organization that is focused purely on a very specific slice of what Aries is doing, and the beauty of Aries is that it's doing a full stack, looking at the situation from a full stack perspective, then I still say there's value in Aries being what it is now. I mean, whatever, my 2 cents, but I think there's still a message there that brings value to staying what is going on, because if that's one of the value points, is that it does all the things, and now we're starting to slice off bits and pieces to go here and there, then it's going to do less of the good things that it does now, but maybe not. So we have 5 minutes left in this call. I think putting together, maybe Alex and Tim and I can start putting together a bit of a content calendar, just for at least getting some of these ideas out in a list form of misconceptions, FAQs, something like that. And then maybe we have this conversation, we present this the conversation that we had today in terms of that sort of content list to the general Aries working group, and talk a little bit about what we see as the value, what we talked about today is as the value of the Aries working group as it stands, and how we want to help promote and reinforce and, make it the robust, awesome, fast moving organization, project that it is. And then we can kind of use that as an intro conversation to have other folks pipe up, because I feel like there just wasn't a lot of conversation, a lot of voices being represented in the kind of first conversation about, does Aries move to OWF? Like that happened 2 months ago now. Not a lot of people piped up, and the people that did, it was a very kind of limited perspective. So if we could use this conversation to entice others to either see the benefits of Aries or help them articulate their views about Aries, it might be helpful.
It could be. It may be worth joining the Aries call on Wednesday. AFJ has requested some time to talk about their proposal to move to the OWF.
Mm-hmm.
They're not proposing that all of Aries does, but they're promoting that AFJ does.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a worthwhile conversation to understand. You're of course also welcome to speak up, but to understand it at the very least is I think going to be important for these future conversations.
Yeah.
I want to say I really appreciate you guys are in this a ton more than I am, and I feel like I haven't got a full picture to contribute well. But there is one other part I want to bring up, just slightly sideways, on specific things I have seen that we can add to this list of what we might want to do. Me, about a month back, there was an EU privacy response, like a 2-pager from somebody about the proposed identity solution and how it had flaws here, and here. And I'm wondering if there's some way that we could do like a blog post or a little activity around some things that are brought up. I know it's a bit after the fact, but it feels like from the conversation I've heard that the privacy preserving aspects of an Aries enabled stack are a really strong point that could benefit people that care about such things. Go on, Sam.
Well, it can, but here's the awkward part. That's not really an Aries conversation. Aries as a project is all about supporting all of the things that people want it to support.
Right.
So that still is a good conversation. And Aries becomes the only place those conversations happen because there simply isn't another venue to have those conversations. But that's the weird part, is that people gripe about the fact that there's too much going on, but there's not enough places for all the other conversations to actually occur.
Right. Okay.
So, I mean, you're right, but I don't know what the answer is, right? And that's hard.
No. Well, I feel a bit scattergun in my contributions because I haven't got a full picture of.
I had a full picture and it's moving a lot, so don't feel bad.
Right. Okay.
I mean,
Let's start with what we got.
if you're marketing everything to everybody, you're marketing everybody, you're marketing nobody. And I think it's the same here. Like if we're saying that Aries does all the things for anybody who wants to do anything at all ever, it's not going to be strong. We need to have, I would love to find more guardrails, more backbone, more, not divisiveness, but more solid boundaries of what Aries is and what it isn't. And I think that would help everybody. I think it would help everybody understand, if there are projects that need to move on somewhere else, if there's projects that, need to fill in the gap, if there's room at the table for other things that fit within those boundaries, but we just didn't know because we didn't articulate them. I don't know. I think there could be.
Or put another way, if we can sit here as very smart, interwoven people into this for an hour and talk about it, we still can't get a handle on it. How is somebody from the outside meant to?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of the problem. I know what it could be. The problem is I don't know which direction it's going. And so to make the maximum use of marketing efforts, I don't know that as a clean answer. So
I think, Sam, just one thought. I think we can pick out. I think we just actually lead a little bit. I think with your input and people that are having these conversations, we actually say, this is a good angle. We should push this angle, and we just do it. Like we put a stake in the ground. I think there's something to be said for that. Like if you've got a thing you think is not being said about Aries, let's just say it. Let's do something. And then maybe the conversation can happen in parallel to put some guardrails on, some bounds, like Helen was saying, of like, guys, we just coalesce a bit on some of the things we're saying about this right now. Is it A, B, and C? Or I don't know what it would be, but I think both could happen. But do something.
I just don't know what I want to do.
That's fair enough.
I think that's my struggle. You're right. I think we should just figure it out and do it, right? Except that I don't know what I want to do.
Interesting, isn't it? Interesting to think about what is it that we advocate? What is, what is our scope in marketing for Aries? What is it we're trying to advocate? And what is the end goal? If it's more than that, we can say that. If it's what Aries can do, or if it's Aries in combination with A, B, and C, maybe it is.
Yeah. Like this whole conversation has been like, well, you don't actually need a ledger. Well, you don't actually have to do verifiable credentials. Well, you don't actually have to do DIDCOM, or you don't actually have to do, like, you don't actually have to do anything at Aries. Then what is it that Aries does?
Well, it reminds me, living back to that late June, I think it was late June conversation, where in the Aries weekly meeting, they tried to nail down, and 4 people had 4 completely different definitions of what Aries was. Okay, food for thought. It was useful. I think I know it feels like in one way we didn't move the needle much in this conversation, but I think actually we really did, because scoping this and exposing the elephant in the room, I think is really valuable in terms of marketing efforts. I'm not pissing in the wind.
Yep.
Okay. I will see you all, I'm sure, quite soon.
Yep.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.